Happy New Year. This is Peter of Wakefield Handmade. It's the first time I'm making a video in 2021, so welcome. I'm back into full production doing a batch of spring pre-orders. Had a very busy November and December. Thank you everybody who ordered. It's the most productive I've ever been in my studio. And so right now I'm working on pots that will be my early spring pre-orders for delivery by March 1st. And I'm concentrating on some traditional red terracotta. The one I'm making right now is going to be a 25-pound pot. I call it a 24, and it's stamped with a 24 because I don't have a 25 stamp. So I've got 2 lumps of clay here, each about 12.5 pounds. So this one is going to be a pot that was inspired by 18th century flower pots. This one in particular, a flower pot that was excavated at Bartram's garden in Philadelphia. If you've never been there, it's a wonderful little oasis, kind of sandwiched in a gritty industrial area between the airport and downtown. But it was the home of 18th century botanist John Bartram, and his son William also was a very famous botanist in the early 19th century. Wrote a book called Travels with Bartram, where he cataloged and described all of the flora and fauna on his travels from through the Carolinas and Georgia and Florida. John Bartram became very well known in England also, and in fact at one point was named the Royal Horticulturist to the Americas, and gained renown in England by sending back plant specimens of plants that were not known in England or Europe. And so one can guess that plant specimens were perhaps sent in pots like I'm making here. And also when settlers were coming from England in the early 18th century and 17th century, they would bring with them plants that they wanted to propagate in the New World, and those were brought in flower pots like this that were made in England. So one of the other things I'm doing for a pre-order is a Williamsburg pot. And that particular piece, which I'll demonstrate in another video, is thought to have been made in England and then transported with plant matter to Williamsburg in probably late 17th century. Of course, 17th and 18th century potters didn't have the advantage of a motorized potter's wheel, so you can imagine they had to put a lot more physical strength into making a pot like this happen. So when I'm throwing a big pot like this, I do probably 3 different pulls just with my hands and a little bit of a sponge to get the initial height. The hardest part is trying to distribute the clay up from the bottom to the upper part of the pot in a way that you don't leave too much at the bottom, but you also don't make it too thin at the top. And then for the last 2 pulls, I'm using a steel rib, which helps get some leverage and really helps move the clay. I've got a pointer here which tells me the point in space where the height and diameter should be close to. Also got to give a shout out on a pot like this to my old friend Guy Wolf. Guy is the one who opened my eyes to garden pottery in about 1996. He and I had both been involved in making reproductions of early American salt glaze stoneware and became friends in the 80s, and then we worked together for quite a while in the late 90s and early 2000s making garden pottery. But he has a encyclopedic knowledge of old flower pots and potters who made them. So if you're ever in Northwest Connecticut, you should go visit Guy, who's near Litchfield, and if you're lucky enough, he'll have some pots for you to take home. You can also find him online, guywolf.com. So one of the characteristic things about these 18th century flower pots that were used a lot in horticulture was that they had a little bit of a bead here that could be decorative and a rim that comes out enough that it really gives a pretty good handle for picking up the pot, and you can imagine a pot this size full of dirt and plant matter is probably going to weigh 50 pounds at least. So Bartram pots had a sort of a dental motif on them on the bead that's put on with a tool like this called a coggle. Now I've added something here that you would not find on the 18th century pots, but you would find on 19th century pots from England, and it's a wording coggle that I put around the rim just above the bead. And this was a traditional element of 19th century English pots, English garden pots. So for any purist out there, they probably wouldn't want their 18th century style pot to have this, but I like the idea of mixing the 2 elements of style. Anyway, that is number 24 Bartram. Thanks for watching.